Good afternoon. For my performance assessment, I decided to actually do an assessment that I observed at Sterling Middle School in Quincy. The performance assessment was a criminal mock trial based on The Telltale Heart, which is a short story. This was their end of the unit performance assessment. And it actually took place on Halloween, which I thought was a little strange at first because I figured, why would a teacher give students a performance assessment on a big day like Halloween where the students aren't really paying attention? They're 8th graders, so they're excited. They're already hyped up on candy from some of their other classes. But she actually told me, the teacher, that for days like Halloween or days before break where students aren't really focused because they're thinking about what they're going to be doing, what their plans are, or they're hyped up on sugar, to actually plan big events like this, such as a performance assessment, because it keeps the kids focused. And I honestly loved this assessment. I thought the way the kids handled it was so professional for 8th graders. And they actually really got into it. And you could see their passion and what they learned shine through in this performance assessment. So I wanted to share it with this class and actually talk about it. So in this assessment for The Telltale Heart, students were asked to either be on the prosecution or on the defense. And they were arguing whether or not the protagonist in The Telltale Heart is guilty of first-degree murder of the old man, or if he was not guilty. So the students were randomly divided up into teams of 3. So everybody had a task. They were either prosecution lawyer number 1, 2, or 3. Prosecution lawyer number 1 had to give the opening argument. Prosecution lawyer number 2 had to give the closing argument, and prosecution lawyer 3 had to present the evidence. And then for the defense, same thing. Defense lawyer number 1, opening argument. Defense lawyer number 2, closing argument. Defense lawyer number 3, present the evidence. So in this class, students really struggled with not actually finding quotes, but using quotes to back up their arguments. They would say an argument and the teacher would be like, oh, why do you think that? And some students would say, oh, because we read it. But they had a hard time actually connecting the text with what they were trying to argue. So she created this assignment, which honestly helped the kids so much. So in the opening argument, students had to introduce their argument. They had to grab the attention of the audience, give their position of the case, saying for the prosecution that he was guilty of first-degree murder, and extensively permitted the crime of killing the old man. Presenting the evidence, it was really cool because for these students, they had the text, and it was set up like a court, and the text was actually in a Ziploc bag. So if the kids were missing a quote, the teacher allowed the students to take a break for 30 seconds to 45 seconds, and they actually got to look through the text quickly to try to find a quote that would help back up their claim. But most students, I think that we only had to reference this twice throughout the whole day, because most students actually came prepared with their quotes, which was awesome. And then, so they had to give 3 pieces of evidence, so three quotes from the text. And the closing argument was to basically present their argument one more time, say any more final things to convince the jury that the defendant was guilty or not guilty. And so here's the rubric that the students were based on. So all students were given this rubric before they even got into their group. So that way, right away, they would know what they were being graded on. So the criteria was an opening statement, presenting evidence, a closing statement, their overall presentation, and passion and pizzazz, which basically entails if they won their trial, they got a point. Did they dress up? They got a point. And did they mostly memorize it? They got 3 points. And all of these criteria are based out of 5 points, so it comes to a total of 25 points. And there's also room for feedback, which each group member was able to get, whether it be positive or a critique that they could work on. And yeah, so an A example for this mock trial was that the student comes into the room. They're dressed professionally as if they're a lawyer themselves. They sit with their group members and they if they present the opening statement, they claim their statement. They have great word choice that's appropriate. They introduce the evidence but don't actually give it. And they give a reasoning as to why they chose this type of evidence. For lawyer number 2 who presents the evidence, an example of this is that they introduce the quotes. They show 3 quotes that support their claim, and they explain the 3 quotes. And they're able to transition smoothly from one quote to the next quote. The closing statement, which is lawyer 3, an example of this, is summarizing the evidence and restating their claim. Again, all 3 lawyers are dressed up professionally. They work together as a team. And their overall presentation, which all 3 group members are critiqued on, is that they're loud, they're engaging, and they use hand gestures. An example is that one kid who ended up getting an A, he actually brought in a briefcase. And he came in, he put the briefcase on the table, he sat down, and when he got up to actually present the evidence, because he was lawyer number 2, he was so funny. He flipped open his briefcase, he had a copy of the Telltale Heart in his briefcase, and he used hand gestures and was just so engaging that everyone wanted him to keep speaking. So I thought this was a great performance assessment, and it was actually set up like it was a court case. There was 2 sides. There was a bailiff. There was a judge. There was a judge costume. The bailiff wore a hat and stuff. It was really cute, and they all had times to speak like it was an actual court. And the audience who decided whether he was guilty or not, finally, were students from other classes, like their free periods, who teachers didn't mind allowing the English teacher to steal them. So this assessment was a summative assessment, which happened at the end of the Telltale unit. Students will act as lawyers to debate whether or not the protagonist was guilty. And yeah, they would be in their groups. They would become lawyers and provide opening statements, evidence, and closing statements. And the teacher chose a mock trial, again, because they're engaging. It was keeping the students on task during Halloween. It helped with their critical thinking skills, and it really helped with them figuring out how to connect their arguments with textual evidence. So that's pretty much it. Thank you.